At the end of the company party, I saw my wife leaving hand in hand with her boss, as if the world had stopped considering me there. And the pain I felt wasn't that of a sudden surprise, but of a silent confirmation, as if everything I had been trying to ignore for months had chosen that night to reveal itself once and for all. I walked over to them. The sound of my footsteps on the wet asphalt of the garage seemed louder than the muffled music of the party inside. When she saw me approaching, she hesitated, let go of his hand, as if shame had finally begun to burn beneath her skin. But I didn't hesitate. I faced them and said, in the firmest voice I could muster, "I hope he offers you more than empty promises." She stood there, frozen, her eyes filled with a panic she didn't know if it was for me or for him. And I simply turned my back. Years of history, years of love, of plans, of laughter and Sundays in comfortable silence, all ended with one sentence and one decision. That night, as I closed the door of my house behind me, I felt for the first time what it was like to be truly alone. In the days that followed, she tried to contact me. Long messages, short messages, desperate calls. Late-night calls. Attempts to explain the inexplicable. She said she was confused, that things weren't quite like that I needed to hear her side of the story. But I had already heard enough. Her lover's silence was louder than any justification. He disappeared, as if she were now a problem of his that he never truly wanted to solve. There were no fulfilled promises, no plans for the two of them, no future at all. Only the echo of the mistake remained. And yet, it wasn't easy. Because love doesn't die just because someone betrays us. Love dies slowly. It rots in silence. And that's what nobody tells you about betrayal. It's not just the shock. It's what comes after. The silence. The empty place at the table. The perfume that still lingers on the bath towel. The toothbrush forgotten in the bathroom glass. The empty drawer where socks used to be together. Our dog staring at the door, waiting for her to come in. The neighbors asking if everything is alright, and you forcing a smile as if to say, it's just a phase, when in reality it's the end of an era. It's hearing the song you used to dance to together and having to turn off the radio halfway through the chorus. It's opening the closet and seeing the dress she wore on our first anniversary hanging there as if waiting for a fresh start that will never happen. For a long time, I wondered what was missing. What I failed to do. What I said that I shouldn't have. Or what I didn't say. Why she chose him, someone who knew what I meant to her. And deep down, even unintentionally, I nurtured the guilt. Because the pain of betrayal isn't just the open wound, it's the permanent doubt. It's sleeping with the question, was I enough? Was I ever truly chosen? Or was I always just a safe option while she waited for something more exciting, newer, more vibrant? Over time, I stopped searching for answers. The pain no longer burned me like before. It only throbbed occasionally, like a scar on a rainy day. I moved on. Slowly, carefully, fearfully. I relearned to enjoy being with myself. To value the silence that once suffocated me. To choose my paths without asking permission. And when I least expected it, I found a new love. Someone who didn't need empty promises. Someone who chose to be there every day, even when it wasn't easy. Someone who didn't confuse stability with boredom, nor presence with obligation. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. And it wasn't because she swore eternal love to me. It was because she demonstrated it in every small gesture, in every morning with coffee in bed, in every fearless conversation. There was no longer a need to explain. There were no fears, doubts, or competition. There was peace. And then, as always happens with the past that refuses to die, she returned. We met again by chance in a bookstore, among shelves full of stories. And her eyes carried the same shadow of someone who had watched an entire movie of her life pass by and didn't know how to change the ending. Amidst tears, she apologized. She didn't try to justify herself. She only asked for forgiveness. I listened. I listened to everything. And I forgave. Not for her. But for myself. Because carrying resentment is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. And I had already suffered enough. The past stayed where it belonged, behind me. She went one way, I went another. And even without bitterness, the scars remain. Not as open wounds, but as living reminders of what happens when you turn your back on true love. But this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the story of what happens afterward. Of how choices come at a price. Of how love can survive pain, but never lies. And of how, even when all seems lost, life can surprise you, in one way or another. But of all the things I've been through, nothing prepared me for that final reunion. When she came back, for the last time. And all I said was, it's already started, but with someone else. What happened there, was the final twist in that story. And nobody, neither her nor I, was prepared for what came next. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize and, we never support any form of betrayal. All the stories you hear are fiction but based on real emotions and situations, to show, without filters, how betrayal can destroy lives, hearts, and entire futures. Get ready to immerse yourself in a story, shocking, intense, and unforgettable. Take a deep breath. The truth doesn't always hurt at first, but it always takes its toll in the end. They met in a simple, almost unassuming way, on a gray autumn afternoon in a neighborhood cafe where the world seemed to slow down. It wasn't love at first sight, nor one of those cinematic stories where glances meet and time stands still. It was something more subtle, a conversation that began by chance, a comment about the book she was leafing through, a shy laugh, a coffee shared in comfortable silence. Ethan wasn't the type of man who immediately impressed. There was a serenity about him that, over time, proved enchanting. And Sarah, with her attentive gaze and sweet voice, had the kind of presence that made others lean in to listen to her better. He worked as a financial analyst, one of those who spend a good part of the day surrounded by spreadsheets, but found time for hobbies like photography and long walks on Sundays. She was in marketing, creative, quick-witted, with a restless mind and a subtle sense of humor. In the first few months, everything seemed easy. They shared the same vision for the future, stability, complicity, a house with natural light, lazy Sundays, and perhaps children someday. Ethan was more reserved, enjoying the comfort of the predictable, the silent rituals of routine. Sarah, on the other hand, sought stimulation in the new, in changes, in experiences that broke the straight line of their days. But instead of conflicting, these differences balanced them. He anchored her, she moved him. And for a while, this worked almost perfectly. Over time, they began sharing an apartment on the second floor of an old building, with large windows and walls that carried stories. They decorated everything together, he with his practicality, she with her aesthetic lightness. The space soon became an extension of both of them, books everywhere, framed photos Ethan took on their trips together, plants she insisted on caring for, even though she often forgot to water them. It was a living house, with the smell of fresh coffee and easy laughter. Their relationship matured. The first challenges arose, as happens with all couples. Some arguments over trivial things, disagreements about what to do on vacation, conflicting schedules. But there was dialogue, there was respect. They always returned to the table to talk, to listen to each other. Sarah sometimes got lost in the rush of work, returning home exhausted, and Ethan, even tired, prepared dinner and left notes around the house just to make her smile. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, but he knew how to love in silence, in care, in constant presence. And that touched her deeply, even though, over time, words began to weigh less than absences. Life accelerated. Professional demands increased for both of them, especially for Sarah, who began traveling more frequently, involved in larger projects. They started seeing each other less during the week. The messages exchanged during the day decreased, the conversations at dinner became shorter. They still loved each other, but now love seemed to require effort, it required planning. It was no longer as spontaneous as before. Still, they resisted. Ethan, true to his patient nature, tried to maintain balance. He understood her dreams, Sarah's need to feel challenged, to avoid stagnation. Many times, he preferred silence to confrontation, believing it was part of the cycle, that they would soon find a new point of stability. She, in turn, deeply valued the support she found in him. She felt safe, welcomed, even when everything outside was chaos. But, over time, this security began to be confused with predictability, and affection with comfort. Birthdays came, family Christmases, holidays divided between social commitments and moments for two. Life went on. And even with the rush of days, there was a solid story there, built with dedication. Friends saw them as an exemplary couple. Those who seemed to have found each other at the right time. Everyone believed they were on their way to the altar. And, in fact, they talked about it. More than once. They made plans. Ethan even started a savings account for the wedding, while Sarah talked about places for an unforgettable honeymoon. But the plans were postponed. First by the rush of life. Then by job instability. Then by nothing in particular. They just kept getting postponed. The change began almost imperceptibly. A more distant gaze. A hug that took longer to arrive. Short answers. Small delays. Dinners that were once sacred became occasional. Ethan felt it, but didn't want to believe it. He thought it was just a phase. That the warmth would soon return, that patience was all it took. Sarah, in turn, began to silently question if that was all. If comfort hadn't turned into boredom. If the love that once made her float now only kept her too firmly on the ground. And yet, they were still together. Because of their history, their respect, their fear of starting over. Because of the idea that, perhaps, love was indeed this, less fire, more constancy. When the invitation to the company's end-of-year party arrived, Sarah insisted that Ethan go with her. It was important. She wanted to introduce him to her colleagues, to her bosses, to show him the man who had been by her side through every achievement. He, even tired after a difficult week, accepted. For her. Because he still believed. Because he still looked at her with the same affection as on the first day. And that night, he put on his best shirt, carefully styled his hair, and waited for her in the living room with a serene smile. When she came out of the room, in a red dress that seemed to have been designed for her, Ethan remembered why he was still there. It wasn't about time. It was about her. The party was held in an elegant hotel, filled with warm lights, ambient music, and clinking glasses of sparkling wine. Sarah greeted everyone naturally. She was brilliant in that kind of environment. She knew how to move, how to smile, how to capture attention. Ethan watched her from afar, admiring her silently. But he also felt that, there, he was a guest in her world. A satellite orbiting a center that no longer included him in the same way. The night continued with laughter, toasts, speeches, and dancing. But something was already weighing on Ethan. An intuition he couldn't name. A feeling of displacement. Of absence. Still, that morning, as he left the party and returned home, he gently held her hand. And when Sarah lay on his chest on the living room sofa, exhausted but smiling, he believed, once again, that love, despite everything, still lived there. It still existed. It still pulsed, even if weaker. What he didn't know, what neither of them wanted to admit, was that that moment of silence between them, on that sofa, would be the last before the world turned upside down. Because love, however strong it may be, needs to be chosen every day. And sometimes, those who chose it in the past no longer have the courage to continue choosing it in the present. And it was in that interval between what was and what would never be again that their story began to unravel. Slowly. Silently. Like a glass that bites from the inside before shattering completely. And when it finally broke, there wouldn't be enough glue in the world to mend the pieces. There would only be the sharp sound of breaking glass, and the silence that follows. That night, there was something different in the air. Ethan knew. The scent of the perfume Sarah wore was the same, but the way she applied it seemed almost like a farewell ritual. The sparkle in her eyes, once natural, now seemed practiced. Her steps through the house were lighter, as if her soul were already elsewhere. And yet, he watched her get ready with the same care as always, with the eyes of someone who still carried within them a kind of faith that only lovers hold. She was beautiful. Beautiful in a way that hurts. Because when someone we love shines like that, but not for us, something inside us silently shatters. Ethan didn't ask anything. He swallowed his intuition, as he had been doing for some time. The car arrived to pick her up, and she got out with a quick kiss on the cheek, a rehearsed smile, and a vague promise not to be back too late. The door closed slowly, as if the whole house knew what he was still pretending not to know. Hours later, the company party continued in a celebratory mood. People laughed loudly, glasses were raised, promises of success were made, and speeches were given by leaders who barely remembered the names of their own employees. Sarah circulated naturally through the room, receiving compliments, smiling, dancing with her colleagues. She felt alive there. Not because of the party itself, but because of that gaze that followed her every step, his. The boss. The man who, in recent months, had gone from professional mentor to confidant, from friend to temptation. And no matter how much she had tried to rationalize it, to tell herself it was just a passing flirtation, the truth was she had already crossed too many lines. It wasn't a decision. It was a sum of small slips, silences, touches that lasted seconds longer, messages at inappropriate times, laughter exchanged when no one else was watching. And that night, with the soft lights reflecting in the glasses, with the music masking the guilt, she chose not to back down. It was outside, in the nearly empty parking lot, that the two walked out hand in hand, in silence. His car waited in the background, but what held them there was the instant between hesitation and surrender. And it was at that exact moment that Ethan arrived. He didn't shout. There was no scene. He simply stopped in front of them with the cutting calm of someone who had already cried everything out inside. He looked at her, then at him, and said in a firm, painfully restrained voice, "I hope he offers you more than empty promises." Sarah froze. The boss discreetly let go of her hand and looked away. Ethan then turned his back and left. But what remained in that garage wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a truth she wasn't ready to face. In the following days, silence was the greatest punishment. No messages answered, no calls picked up. Sarah tried to talk, tried to explain, tried to ask for another chance. But all she received was the echo of her own absence. Ethan had vanished from her routine as if he had never existed. And the further he distanced himself, the more she felt the real weight of the choice she had made. Her boss, in turn, acted as if nothing had happened. He returned to his cold and objective professional demeanor, limiting himself to speaking to her only when necessary. Without affection, without any trace of what had been between them. She, who had destroyed a home for a promise of adventure, now found herself alone, surrounded by judgmental glances, the loneliness of an empty apartment, and the silent pain of realizing she had lost everything for nothing. Unable to cope with the abandonment, she sought out Ethan in person. She waited outside the building where he was temporarily staying, and when he went out for a run, she approached him. He stopped when he saw her, but said nothing. Her eyes filled with tears, she tried to explain, to tell him she was confused, that she didn't know what she was thinking anymore, that she loved him, that it had all been a mistake. Ethan listened in silence. And then, with a tired look, he replied, "I spent years choosing you. Every single day. Even when it was hard. Even when you distanced yourself. Even when I felt like I was becoming alone in our relationship. I kept choosing you. But now, finally, I've chosen myself." And then he ran off again, leaving her there, standing, embraced by her own guilt. Time passed. Not much, but enough for Ethan to begin rebuilding his life. He threw himself into his work, resumed old habits, made new friends. He met someone. It wasn't planned. It happened one weekend when he had traveled to photograph a trail in a neighboring town. She was there, sitting on a rock, reading a book, smiling with the wind on her face. She wasn't like Sarah. She was something else. A different energy. A different rhythm. And, above all, a different truth. There was a lightness about her that he no longer remembered. They started talking. Then came the coffees, the walks, the long nights exchanging stories. It wasn't an attempt to forget the past. It was simply a new chapter beginning to be written. Months later, Ethan was walking alongside this new woman at an outdoor art fair when, turning a corner, he bumped into Sarah. The reunion was like a punch to the chest, but he remained calm. She, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. Her eyes scanned the scene as if trying to undo what she saw. He was smiling. He was holding hands with someone. He was at peace. Sarah, on impulse, waited for him to move away from his new companion and went to him. She wanted to say something. Anything. "I still think about you every day," she began. "I regret everything. I threw away the best thing I ever had." Ethan sighed, looking into her eyes with a mixture of sadness and compassion. "I know. But it's already started, with someone else." She was speechless. Silence was the cruelest answer. And when he walked away, taking his own ghosts with him, Ethan calmly returned to the new woman who awaited him with a serene smile. The past was finally behind him. But not without scars. Not without lessons. Because there are choices that cannot be undone. There are doors that, once closed, never open again. And Sarah learned this too late. The real impact wasn't the betrayal itself, but what it cost. The life that could have been. The love that was wasted. The peace she would never regain. And Ethan's gaze, now turned towards the future, would never again meet hers in the same way. Because there are mistakes that are forgiven, but not forgotten. And loves that are gone, forever. Spring arrived silently, as if the city needed to relearn how to breathe after months stifled by the cold and the shadows of everything left behind. It was as if life, despite everything, insisted on continuing, even for those who no longer knew how to go on. Ethan now walked among newly blossomed flowers with the lightness of someone carrying the right weight, neither the pain of the past nor the fear of the future. His relationship with Olivia, the woman he met by chance on a random trail, had transformed into something deep, true, and peaceful. There was no urgency or demands, only presence. She didn't try to occupy too much space or rescue parts of someone who no longer existed. She simply accompanied him, and that was what he needed. With her, Ethan learned that starting over isn't about erasing, but accepting that there are pages that cannot be rewritten, only overcome. With each conversation at the end of the afternoon, with each simple gesture, he felt he was exactly where he should be. Meanwhile, Sarah was living through a completely different time. After the unexpected reunion at that fair, everything in her seemed to crumble. She tried to move on. She tried to convince herself that she could start over. She went out with other people, sought new circles, but no conversation filled the silence Ethan had left. No company could compete with his gaze, which now lived in another direction. The walls of the apartment seemed smaller. The sofa where she used to throw herself after work no longer brought comfort, only memories. The scent of the perfume she used to wear now suffocated her. She began to avoid the places they frequented together, but soon realized that his memory was ingrained in every corner. It was impossible to escape who she once was. Even harder was dealing with who she had become. Her former boss, with whom she thought she would experience something intense, never contacted her. He pretended nothing had happened, returning to being just another face among many at the company. And with time, Sarah also faded. The colleagues who once admired her began to look at her with suspicion. Her energy was no longer the same. It was as if she had lost her sparkle, that sparkle that Ethan noticed even on the most ordinary days. In a desperate attempt at change, he resigned. He wanted to leave the city, seek a change of scenery. But nothing seemed enough. Life went on, but not the way she imagined. Time, cruel as it is, offered no respite. And each evening was a reminder of what she had and let slip through her fingers. Sometimes I would go back to the cafe where they met. I would sit at the same table. I would order the same thing. I would close my eyes and try to hear his voice saying something about the book she was reading that day. But all he could hear was the clinking of cutlery, the sound of distant conversations, and emptiness. An emptiness that no one else could fill. Ethan, for his part, never looked back again. Not out of pride, but out of self-love. This new phase of his life wasn't made of grand events, but of small daily victories. A home built calmly, a love that didn't need to prove anything, only to be. Olivia respected his silence, understood his pauses. And he, finally, allowed himself to smile without the weight of the past. He didn't erase Sarah from his memory. He simply accepted that the love he felt for her was real, but ceased to exist the moment it ceased to be reciprocated. And that, however painful it was also freedom. From time to time, he saw something on the street that reminded him of an old scene. A restaurant, a song, a smell. But now, instead of feeling pain, he felt gratitude for having survived it. For having overcome it. For having found a love that asked nothing of him but to be himself. In the end, they each went their separate ways. Sarah, carrying the consequences of her choices, trying to rewrite her own story without the most important chapter. Ethan, building new chapters with someone who knew how to see in him what Sarah didn't value. Their story had no shouting, no scandals, no cinematic endings. It had hard truths, silent tears, inevitable departures. But, above all, it had lessons. Because sometimes love doesn't end. It's just buried alive by absence, by neglect, by betrayal. And when you try to unearth it, it's no longer the same. This is the story of someone who had everything and didn't know how to hold on. Of someone who lost what was essential seeking the superficial. Of someone who destroyed a sincere love for a moment of ego and vanity. And of someone who, even wounded, chose to move on lightly, without carrying the hatred of the one who hurt him, only the certainty that he did what he could, and that he deserved more. Sarah still lives with the memories. You still look at old photos. You still ask yourself, what if? But life doesn't work with possibilities. It works with choices. And she made hers. Ethan, on the other hand, rediscovered love. And not a movie love, but a real love, of peace, of presence, of reciprocity. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Would you have forgiven? Would you have acted differently? Leave your comment below and share your opinion. And of course, if you enjoyed this content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories. Remember, betrayal doesn't just destroy the relationship. It destroys trust, friendship, respect, plans, and even the very identity of both the betrayer and the betrayed. Therefore, we will never support any kind of betrayal here. Love demands daily choices, and each one comes at a price. Until next time.